Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
I was going to ask you about the challenges around sustainable procurement, and you've kind of very well described at least one of them. But do you have any other thoughts on what's challenging and what's difficult?
Yes, so, you touched on this too when you said it's hard to know what is what and what to trust when we talk about some of the certifications. Some of well, actually both of the glove manufacturers who right now are being sued in US District Court, they actually both have in their supplier code of conduct that they are SA 8000 certified, that they do have these social protections in place. And so it's interesting to me that how can we verify these things? How do we know what to trust in that? So that's certainly a challenge at the purchaser level. Just knowing, I mean, these are such long, multi-tiered, opaque supply chains. How can we bring greater transparency to that? And you're right, I did go ahead and touch on this idea of creating a fair labor label specifically for nitrile gloves. I think that would be a game changer. I also think if any glove manufacturers are listening, that it would be a boost for their business because the first nitrile glove manufacturer that is able to objectively show that and demonstrate that, they will have a lot of business, especially from higher ed, because we have due diligence policies. So I think it's going to be a win-win for them as well. But as far as challenges in higher ed in general, we have a low bid process that often correlates with less sustainable. And so we really need to start framing this risk assessment with longer ROIs and look at these kind of longer periods of time. We plan to stay in business for a long time, so let's extend those ROIs and stop, kind of looking at that low bid. I know this is a scientist speaking on procurement, so take it with a grain of salt for what it is, but it seems like it would really drive us more towards sustainability if we did. When we have those longer ROIs, the sustainability will usually sell itself in those situations. And often, our purchasers don't understand the need for more sustainable procurement and how their demand would help things change quicker. So, those current standards taking root, of course, we're here with ISO 2400, this taking root, and SA 8000 for that factory level, that taking root. These standards taking root would be the quickest, best, most efficient way that we could reach these sustainable procurement practices. And so we really need to support these standards and also to buy into them, Let's prioritize them. We have some challenges here in the US too. And, I don't have to tell you about kind of our national challenges as far as capitalism and the drive for more, more, more. But we are the largest importer of at risk goods for forced labor in the world. In fact, I think if you add up like the next 5 or 6 countries, we are still the largest importer of at risk goods. So at this level, we really need to be moving more towards circularity in our economy and our business practices. I took a class, University of Cambridge class on circular economy that I didn't realize was primarily for the business sector. So I was one of the few kind of academia folks in there. But it was so interesting to me how, from a business standpoint, this idea of circularity is really a win-win and that it's protecting your supply chain. It is, if you're taking these products back, you're not paying for raw extraction. You're not paying to secure more materials. You already have that available to you. So we need to be moving in those directions as well.
Yeah, I really like the point you made as well about longer term relationships with suppliers, and certainly in my experience, audits can have a limited effect and as you say, how do you trust certain certifications? How can we be sure that the audits are effective and suppliers aren't deceiving auditors, or even in some cases bribing auditors? We know that that happens in some parts of the world, and certainly in the UK, I work with a building products manufacturer, and they buy a lot of stone from India, and they've been working with the supplier in the same quarry for the last 20 years, and actually embedding that relationship and helping to build schools for the children so the kids can go to school, helping a welfare program for the families. And they've got a whole, intergenerational labor force now in that supply chain through working effectively with a supplier. But you can only do that if you commit to that supplier and that supplier commits to you in the longer term. At the other end of the spectrum, certainly when I was working on the London Olympics, I found a computer manufacturer that changes the suppliers for every component every 6 months, just simply to keep them price competitive. Now, you'll never have that level of traceability that you talk about in that type of relationship. And the nitrile gloves example is probably one at that extreme rather than the extreme of working with the same quarry in India over the last 20 years. So it's a really good point. We've spoken a lot about the challenges. Let's be a bit more positive. Tell me what you're proud of. What have you achieved in the last few years? You obviously really got into this whole sustainable procurement thing. Tell us about your achievements.
Well, so I think one of the things I'm proud of is creating this Green Labs program at the University of Georgia. So so really sustainable science is not just limited to higher ed and it's not just limited to industry, but it impacts all of us. It impacts the planet. It impacts our supply chain. It certainly impacts our waste streams. But also there's this really amazing correlation between sustainable science having faster times to market, being safer spaces to work in, lower risk. So it's interesting to me how when these things kind of come into alignment, it really is beneficial for the whole, for the greater whole. But yeah, so I'm proud of creating the Green Labs program. It was something that the University of Georgia, we have 1,900 research labs on our main campus alone. It is at most R1 research institutions, you'll see that their labs or account for maybe between 20 and 40% of their square footage, or you would say probably square meters, but use between 40 and 60% of the energy. And so they're very, very energy and resource intensive spaces. So if we can make these spaces more sustainable, if we can make our science more sustainable, that I feel like filters into the actual work that we're doing as well. So I think that we'll be, removing our culture into a more sustainable direction by doing that. I'm also proud of being, I guess, a positive disruptor. I heard that term recently and I really liked it. I don't want to be a disruptor, but if we can stop and say, why have we been doing it this way for so long? Can we refresh our browsers to see what, if these operations, if these systems are really serving us? Like you, I feel like you also are re-envisioning, procurement, which has existed for a very long time and people have gone about it and they know how to do it. But really, this is about refreshing our screens and saying, like, how can we look at this differently? How can we change processes that are no longer serving us? And certainly challenging those systems and being a voice for those that don't have this opportunity, to speak up, or maybe are scared to speak up or don't have that voice. And certainly for the planet, which is, such a special gift to all of us. But also, if we don't take care of the planet, it may look like species going extinct. It may look like, plants changing because of the climate. It may look like bees, but we are, that's a house of cards, and we're at the very top of that. So we're next. So this is really about our survival and our wellness and wellness for future generations.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Final question, if I may. A lot of our listeners are at the start of their sustainable procurement journey, or we sometimes have people whose chief executive has suddenly got the idea of sustainable procurement and then picks somebody and says, right, you're doing sustainable procurement. What advice would you give to somebody at the beginning of their journey?
Well, first of all, actually on your website, you have on the ISO 2400 website, there's a self-assessment that I think is a really good place to start, actually. And then there's a lot of education and information there, a tremendous amount of resources there. A resource I didn't know about until I met with you was the supply school, which is just a tremendous offering. Honestly, I really want to do it, Sean. So, how can we make that happen? But at the user level, I tell research your products. If you have someone, if you're purchasing for your institution, be that person. What are your top 10 products that you're ordering? And then do the supply chain research on those products. Ask questions. Are there factory or manufacturing standards? And if there's not a clearly sustainable choice for that, then maybe ask the end users, you know, if they have input into that. So it's really interesting. Crockett et al. Published a paper in 2015 that showed that when we realize that we are inadvertently harming others, we self-modify our behavior to minimize that negative impact. And so if it's not clear at the procurement level, ask the end users about the product and share the challenge with them, because this is where a lot of the ideas for solutions come from. Maybe that product isn't 100% necessary. Maybe there's something else that can be used in its place. So really, there's a lot of solutions that come from that level, but only if they know that something isn't working. So that's why I try and share this with our researchers. Another incredible place to start if you are trying to purchase more sustainably and be more sustainable is the International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories. So we have a community of practice that is geared towards circular economy and labs. It's a beautiful website. It's actually a new website. We just created it this past year. Anyone can create an account there for free. You just have to sign up. But it's a vibrant community where people share this knowledge, we share this information. Um, there's a lot of owners, there's designers, there are distributors and suppliers there as well. Another resource would be Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which I mentioned earlier, which also, like the ISO website, has a lot of resources and information. If you're in science, you can look for the ACT label. The ACT label is basically a nutritional label, a sustainability nutritional label you'll see on scientific supplies. It's about transparency in the manufacturing process, in the shipping process, raw materials, and it gives a rating, it gives a score, much like the calories you might see on a candy bar. It gives you a score to let you know where that product is along the sustainability continuum. Just because a product has an ACT certification doesn't necessarily make it sustainable. But what it means is that that manufacturer is willing to be transparent about their process. And that is a really strong positive first step for sustainable purchasing in science. And then the last piece of advice that I would give to people wishing to procure more sustainably is to try to engineer out problematic items. Like we talked about the styrofoam coolers earlier. The providers likely have a solution that they've already planned because they're not going to lose your business and they really don't want an interruption in your business. So if you can engineer out those problematic items, well, that's a win-win.
Star, thank you very much. I think that's given us a fascinating insight into the whole world of sustainability science and sustainable procurement, and you've made some really good points. So thank you very much for your time. I'm sure our listeners are going to love hearing from you.
Sean, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your leadership too. Since since you first reached out, I've learned a lot about your contribution to sustainable procurement, to sustainability across myriad sectors. And I'm really impressed, and it makes me really happy to be here sharing this time with you. Thank you for the invite. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.